All right, we're continuing with post-impressionism, getting out of France, only just to meet our next artist. Then we'll be seeing some artworks that he did depict while in France. This is none other than Vincent van Gogh. Van Gogh was from Holland, so he is a Dutch artist who grew up with his siblings, the son of a minister. So he had a very religious upbringing. He pursued the ministry himself as a possible career trajectory, as well as tried other avenues and pathways as a young man with little productive result. So surprisingly, while we've met a lot of artists who, as children, teenagers, young adults, began their training as artists, going to working with a guild maybe in the Renaissance, and then later attending an art school like artists did in France, you find with Van Gogh that he didn't start becoming a painter until he was well over 30 years old. A lot of that has to do with the encouragement from the sibling he was most attached to, his brother Theo, who was an art dealer in Paris. And there's a whole archive in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam that describes and illuminates their close relationship and how much Van Gogh was supported by Theo in terms of brotherly encouragement, but helped him gain the confidence to give the path towards becoming a painter a real try. So let's take a look at his first major work, just as a little background and one of the many self-portraits associated with Van Gogh, as I continue to talk about him as a little something to look at as a background. We are not focusing on any of these artworks, but Van Gogh is very recognizable. You can recognize a Van Gogh in any museum in the world because of that bold use of color, form, and extremely visible brushwork. Those are those three formal elements we talked about with post-impressionism, and Van Gogh is associated with the post-impressionist style. What you find, though, with Van Gogh is another layer. This is another artist who felt himself, in many ways like Toulouse-Lautrec, as an outsider, didn't quite fit in with the popular crowd, if you know what I mean, had tremendous loneliness, experienced profound self-doubt. And a lot of that seems to have to do with his famous mental health struggles. Many of you may know that he cut off his own ear and mailed it to a woman. There's some debate about what the rationale behind that was, but it was a moment of madness. It was a self-mutilation that he inflicted upon himself. So this is a man with deep sensibilities, deep feelings, and when it comes to his artwork, which we'll move on to the painting that is one of the two we're going to focus on, you're going to see an artist who, more than we've seen ever before, really embraces color, line, and form in such a expressive way. And again, that is the characteristic of post-impressionist art, the use of color, line, and form in an expressful way. And this is how Van Gogh rolls. He is a very much an expressive guy here. So this is the first painting we're going to look at. It's called Night Cafe. It actually hangs at Yale University, at their University Art Gallery. It was painted in 1888. What you see is not too far off from what Toulouse-Lautrec was depicting in his painting at the Moulin Rouge. It's not like prime time in a cafe. It's maybe like that 2 a.m. experience where you have tables that are unbussed, lots of forgotten and half-drunk drinks on them, a few people who've had one too many kind of slouched on the table, kind of a lonely couple in the back of the room, and a barkeep in a white suit who seems to be isolated and, waiting for the place to close down perhaps for the night. This is one of those establishments where you kind of poke your head in, right, and go like, I'll pass, nobody's in there. It's messy, forget it. And that is kind of the vibe Van Gogh was going for. Quote, he said something along the lines that he was going for an empty, dreary room, full of what he called sleeping hooligans. So he's not trying to create a painting that's promoting the place or how glamorous it is. He's doing the exact opposite. And again, using those formal elements of color, line, and form to do that. So you can imagine him, as a lonely soul, probably encountering places like this as he, moved to more urban places. He traveled to France, for instance, seeking engagement. He did have a friendship briefly with the famous painter Paul Gauguin. But many hours were probably a struggle for him, his isolation and loneliness. So it was a unique lens on the part of Van Gogh. And the other thing that we have to keep in mind with Van Gogh is he didn't ever experience formal training as an artist. He didn't go to art school. He was self-taught. And so his expressive use of these qualities, these elements, are even more so because he doesn't have the voice of an old professor telling him, you know what, there's too much visible brushwork. Your brushwork is coarse, it's uneven. Your colors are clashing. Your floor, your recession of space is skewed and too oblique. It looks like the floor is uplifted and make you feel kind of thrown off, like Toulouse-Lautrec also did at the Moulin Rouge, by the way. But it's this directness. It's like, in a way, that lack of formal training gave him more of an expressive freedom when it came to Van Gogh's art. So, in the center of the composition, he has a pool table, but nobody's enjoying it. It's casting this harsh shadow underneath from the lighting that's just bleary, right? Look at all this visible brush strokes around these lamps, delineating and describing kind of this glare of ugly lighting in this night cafe, and again casting this strong shape or form of this shadow beneath the pool table, kind of underscoring the loneliness, the emptiness of this space. And of course we know Van Gogh knows loneliness. He knows how to describe it as well with objects. The use of line, again, we see the visible brushwork. Apparently he even would apply tubes of paint directly to the canvas. This is how unshackled he was by convention. Strong use of line takes our eye to the back of the room. Again, up-tilted, like a fun house, throwing you off, making you feel uneasy. That's the goal, right? Not to make you feel embraced by this venue, but make you feel a little thrown off, a little wary. In the back, you can see his strong use of color. And of course, red walls were in Paris. They were not afraid of color, but the clash between the green ceilings and the red walls and this kind of yellow-green hardwood flooring, it's not working. It's fighting and clashing. It's expressive in more of a negative way. So there you have it, Van Gogh's Night Cafe, his description of Paris nightlife at a time when, he is not meant to glamorize it, but to intensify the feeling of isolation and loneliness and more of the kind of sleazy aspects of nightlife in the city. And as he said, one of his famous quotes when he was rendering this painting, his goal was to quote, to describe a place, quote, where one can ruin oneself, go mad, or commit a crime, unquote. All right, let's move on to his next painting, which is probably one that is his most famous. And that is none other than Starry Night. Let me adjust my view for you to see another quote associated with Van Gogh. Hopefully you can see that. Starry Night was executed in 1889. So we are about a decade later, and this is towards the end of his career. I'll fill you in if you don't know what happened to him. But this is a view. As you can see, a nocturnal view of the night sky. There's a series of rolling hills, a sleepy little village down below. You can see the church steeple here. And in the foreground, kind of giving a sense of foreground, is the very top part of a cypress tree. Those are those long kind of column-like trees that you find in even in California landscape design here in Los Angeles. So it kind of establishes a foreground, a village, a bit of a middle ground, and then the night sky fills up almost 2/3 of the canvas with this very visible brushwork. It's some think that Van Gogh was onto something here with his description of turbulence and how the atmosphere is always moving and fluid. And he describes it in these very strong wave-like forms. So form, again, is very big with the post-impressionists. You can see that just in the description of the moon and the stars, these kind of radiating orbs with, again, very prominent brushwork. If you were to run your hand over it, you would feel the just layers and direct application of paint in a Van Gogh. You'd get in trouble with the museum, but you get where I'm going with that. All right, so more strong use of form and line with the cypress makes a strong, statement in terms of shape. The strong geometric roof lines and cube-like shapes of the little village with their just simple use of line to describe their roofs and the hills. All of this is a view from a real place. This is where Van Gogh realized his mental health struggles were becoming really difficult for him, and he checked himself into an asylum for treatment. And this was the view from his room. And as the quote says, something he wrote in one of his letters to his brother, I have a tremendous need for, shall I say the word, for religion. So I go outside at night to paint the stars. So remember, he's a spiritual guy. He's finding the night sky a tremendous source of comfort. It helps him connect to spiritual thinking as he's struggling within the walls of that sanitarium. Another letter he wrote to his brother Theo a year earlier than he executed this painting said something along the lines, you know, Theo, it takes a train to travel from place to place, but it takes death to reach the stars. And so another year now, a year after this painting, Starry Night, Van Gogh shoots himself in what some think was a suicide. Having not painted more than a decade and having not sold a single artwork. So the tragic life of Dutch post-impressionist painter Vincent van Gogh is, if only he knew his posthumous fame in regard to the history of art. But one, again, who was not shy as a post-impressionist when it came to the use of bold color, line, and form. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.